This is Interpreting Wine host and founder Lawrence Francis, welcoming you to this, my Willamette Valley Winemaker special. Across these 20 episodes recorded in quickfire fashion in January 2020, I got to meet a broad selection of people making wine in the region, both a variety of winemaking scale from the micro to the macro, and also different focuses that include different aging vessels, different grape varieties, sparkling wines, and of course different interpretations of Pinot. Episodes are going to be released in the order that they were recorded, so you'll get to be a virtual guest on the tour. 2 things you can do to help spread this series even further. One is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, either where you're listening or on your favorite podcast platform. And the second, the one that's really going to help push this out there, is to head to interpretingwine.com/iTunes and leave a review letting me know what you think. A genuine, huge thank you in advance. Today's episode of the Willamette Valley Winemaker Special features Scott Neal of Coeur De Terre Vineyard. At what was the beginning of my 3rd full day in the Willamette Valley, we hear Scott's origin story and transition into the winemaking lifestyle. He gives us an in-depth vineyard tour and talks vineyard practices, integrating these with his judicious use of technology, before he guides us through a tasting of 3 Pinot Noirs, his Heritage Reserve Estate from 2015, and his single block wines named after his 2 daughters, Tallulah and Abby, both from 2016. Enjoy.
Scott Neal, winemaker owner, Coeur De Terre Vineyard. My wife and I moved here 21 years ago now, and it was kind of an interesting path, I think. So I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. Minnesota's right in the dead heart of the Midwest of the country, growing corn and beans and what everyone does in Minnesota. But through that, I think I really kind of learned the love of land, love of growing things. And surprisingly, there's a lot of similarities between just being a farmer. You know, being a farmer, growing wine has so much to do with just farming. We like to romanticize a lot of it and things, but it is getting your boots dirty. So that's something I grew up with. So it was about 21 years ago. My wife and I had just gotten married, and I was working a job where I could live anywhere in the country, kind of in the sales job. We were living in the suburbs of Denver. And I grew up on a farm, and I really was not enjoying being in kind of a subdivision. So I was actually working my job and had come to Oregon. And the pathway was, when I was a kid, growing up on a farm in Minnesota, wine is not a big thing, as you might imagine. In fact, my parents, if it wasn't in a gallon jug and sitting in the fridge for 3 months, that was their kind of wine. Their Burgundy was Hardy Burgundy from Gallo, I think is who it was. So I never thought wine was a big deal. I actually, in college, got into brewing beer. And that was kind of my first kind of thing about turning sugar into alcohol. And I really enjoyed that. I like the chemistry aspect of it. I like the idea of making something from, because I always grew stuff as a kid, but then actually taking that and making it into a product that you can enjoy was really cool. So that all kind of came together, and actually at one point, I had a friend I worked with who was very into wine. And I was like, wine's that stuff that kind of tastes a little bit like vinegar, you mean? That stuff? And no, he said, no, you just haven't had the right wine. So he introduced me to good wine. And at that point, I started getting into wine. And when I kind of get into stuff, I kind of start delving down the rabbit hole a little bit. And then at one point, I know I had a Burgundy. It was a Volnay. And it kind of changed my life. It was like, what is going on? This is not the wine I understood before. And decided to really start getting into that. So it's just kind of Pinot Noir suddenly became this kind of touchstone thing. And then we got to the point where, again, my wife and I had just gotten married. We were kind of looking at, what are we going to do? And I was here in Oregon, And a Wine Spectator article came out in, I think it was 97, talking about Oregon as this new frontier for Pinot Noir. And I'm like, I'm here in Oregon, and Pinot Noir is this thing that's in the back of my head, and I want to get back to farming. And I said, I talked to my wife about it. And she was like, well, why don't you stay an extra day? So I did. I stayed an extra day. I drove out into the valley, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I actually think we could afford to buy some land out here. I think we could actually be crazy enough to do this. So we came out in Memorial Day weekend of 98 on a trip. And the idea was we're going to scope out Oregon and see if it makes sense. And that weekend we were just driving around. We got lost in the valley, drove by this property. And, for those who come out here, which we'd love to see, you'll see we were lost. And we were just trying to get a feel for the area. We saw a for sale sign. I had a compass. It was a south-facing hillside. Met all kind of the general criterias. And we bought the property that weekend. We actually hand wrote an offer ourselves and submitted it to the owner and bought it that weekend and moved in Labor Day weekend of 98 with the idea of, we're young and maybe too stupid to know any better, but let's carve out a new life and let's see what we got here. So we moved here to Oregon in 98 to grow Pinot Noir and have been since then. Our focus is, so with never making wine in my life before that. But, I'm kind of this guy, I think there's probably people that can help, and there's books and there's things to do. And the good thing about grapes are we didn't buy an established vineyard. This was all blank land at the time. So you kind of have 4 years to kind of get your feet under you as the grapes are growing. The growing part of it, I kind of learned quickly. That's something I've done, the farming aspect of it. But working with, one thing I found in Oregon, and I think you'll see that while you're here, that I came in and I really wanted to do good stuff. I wanted to do the right thing. And there were so many people here that helped, that were not like, you're going to steal my special sauce. They were all about, let's make this thing better together. And so many people that helped me in those 4 years. I'd go in work crush for free and, sweat equity, and they would share with me what they did. And, then I got a chance to make some, and, we just kind of slowly grew into it. We didn't have a ton of money when we moved here. We were newlyweds, and we literally, I remember I had to borrow some money from my stepdad or my father-in-law to afford the place. But we've grown this very slowly as we could. So we bought originally 50 acres of land in what's now the McMinnville AVA, which is a sub-AVA of the greater Willamette Valley. And it was 50 acres that was basically, it was owned by a dentist and his wife, and it was just sitting here doing nothing. So really nothing had ever been farmed on this property. And what's cool is, where Pinot Noir grows really well in Oregon is on the hillsides. And that's the part that's never really been farmed in the Willamette Valley. The farmers all farm the lower land, which is this very deep, rich soil that grows basically anything. But the hillsides are these pristine hillsides that have just been untouched from the beginning of time. So we had this land that had trees on it at one point. It had been logged 100 years ago, but was just basically pristine and waiting to be farmed. So we planted our first little block of Rinell's block where we bought these vines. It was a lot of money for us at the time when we bought those vines, those original vines. And I was kind of doing the math of I want to have 40 acres, and I'm wondering what this is going to, how are we going to get there? I actually had a friend teach me how to graft our own vines. So all of the rest of the vines here that you'll see that we went from the original Rinell's block was bought. We grafted the rest of these vines ourselves in our own greenhouse. At one point stumbling onto the idea of Massal selection. So these new blocks are all random plantings of multiple clonal plantings, so that the whole idea that we're trying to capture is we learned very early on. This property in the Coast Range has got this huge diversity of soils, from volcanic to sedimentary to different, clay-based and different kind of parentage underneath this. So the idea that we're trying to focus on here is that, Pinot Noir being that grape that shows place like no other grape, is create plantings that are kind of randomly planted, this Massal selection of these clones that we think work here, and keep them separately, vinify them separately, so that when you taste the wines from Rinell's block or from Tallulah's, that what you're tasting is not some winemaking trick or some sort of clonal thing, or it's about the place. And the fact that they're 100 yards apart, but they're just completely different soils, different aspects, different exposures, it comes through in the wine. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
When I first was hearing about this and talking about it, I'm like, come on, it's 100 yards apart. When I grew corn, the corn all tasted the same. It just amazed me how different, and how not just different they are, but how, like Rinal's block is always Rinal's block. It has this line that runs through it. Vintages are very important to us, but Rinal's block always tastes like Rinal's block, which is amazing to me. So that's what we've really focused on, and we really focused on trying to be create a place that's healthy. We've been organically grown from day one. We really try to be minimalists as much as we can. Certainly minimalist in the winery. I actually think in the vineyard, I have a technical background, engineering background, so that's where I apply a lot of kind of, I think, technology and ideas of like imaging, and we're doing a lot of stuff to try to more proactively farm our property, which I think is fascinating. What we're going to be able to do in the vineyard with technology is going to be very fascinating. The ability to see what's going on through like aerial imaging with spectral imaging of different wavelengths of light. And with the idea of being more targeted in what we're doing and more specific. I said when we originally got here, we used to farm these block by block. We'd go and farm this area, Rinal's block like this, or Sarah Jane's like that. We've gotten to a point now where with this aerial imaging, I can actually go plant by plant, and we're making kind of prescriptions for our vineyard, plant by plants. And my vineyard guys have a phone with a map with these color washes that I put on them to say, if you're in the red zone, this is what you're going to do in that particular spot. If you're in the green zone, we're going to do this. Yeah. My goal this year is, one of the things that, we're organic, but we still spray stuff, right? We still spray for powdery mildew and things. My goal this year is to take our sprayer and hook it up to these maps with a GPS to modulate the amount of spray we use, because the different vigor and the way the plants are growing, they need different levels of spray. But right now what you have to do, because you basically can set your sprayer in one, you set for the worst case scenario, and you're spraying these areas that don't need it with that same amount of spray. So my goal is to hook up a GPS to our tractor and our sprayer that modulates the spray based upon the last image that was about 2 days ago. And with the goal of decreasing the amount of stuff that we put out in the environment by half. That's my stated goal. So the idea is less is more. The less we can put inputs, the better it's going to be. The less impact we can have. And I think technology in the vineyard can do that very well. I think technology in the vineyard is a good thing. I think technology in the winery can be a very slippery slope. That as you think that as a winemaker, you can start like, I'm going to really put my thumbprint on this, and by doing all this different stuff, and trust me, there's an additive or a machine to do anything you want. Every time you do it, it extracts the soul from your wine. So our goal is, once it comes, grow really good grapes that are expressive of the place, and then as a winemaker, really try to stay out of the way of that, or just let it kind of show itself. I try to think of this as like the way I raise my kids, I hope, right? And I found this, and this is by trial and error. When you try to put the parameters around them a little too tightly, you're going to do this, they kind of squish through your fingers, right? Stuff happens. But when you give them bumpers and guidelines and let them be what they're going to be within those guidelines, that to me is where you get the best results. And I think that's with wine too. It's not that I don't do anything as a winemaker, because I think that's a mistake too. But to set these very wide guidelines and let that wine express itself as to what it is, to me is the way to go. So that's what my wife and I moved here, like I said, 20 years ago, and just started, planted our first little 3 acres, slowly added as we could. We were lucky enough, our neighbor wanted to sell some property, so we bought 42 more acres, so we have a total of 92 now. And we have just under 40 planted. And we never sold grapes, ever. We make our grapes into wine here, and we are an 100% estate winery now, so we grow everything that we make, which again to me is very important. For a little while we were buying some grapes and making them from good growers, but frankly it just never felt like my wine unless I was growing the grapes. It's like, I don't know. To me, that's just so much a piece. It's like 90% of the job is growing really good fruit from a place. Wine is from somewhere, not somebody. So that's what we try to do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I have been really, blown away, I think, by everybody I've met so far. Just the ability to, just be really eloquent and engaging about what's happening here. And I just think, that passion, is really shining through. And I think, and I hope the listener is really picking up on that. I'm sure they are. I'm actually really excited by the themes that you brought out there, and the one I've got written down big and center on my page here is technology and imaging. And maybe not the most romantic words to be used, and I guess for some wine drinkers and for some people in the trade, maybe even sort of anathema and like, oh, technology is sort of ruining our wine. But I really like the way that you brought in the idea of the technology as a means to understand the land and to be able to do things like farming more considerately of the land, using less inputs, and actually, giving the grapes what they want, really. And as you say, within those buffers, to give, with an idea, to give yourself the freedom to be less interventionalist in the winery. I just think that shows that sometimes we lambast technology and we say it takes the romance out of it. But to me, that idea, that philosophy is landing right here, in the heart, and it's saying, look, there's actually good points here. There's lots of grey areas. We don't always have to say technology is bad and kind of, farming intuitively is the only way to do it. So given all of that, I think you are, going to be hopefully excited to share with me and share with the listener, a real sense of what's happening underneath the property here. I've just driven up here. It's absolutely stunning. Middle of January, and there's just those gorgeous rolling hills. There's mist. It's obviously not peak season. What beyond what I'm seeing there as the sort of the sort of stunning, I guess, veneer on top, what's going on underneath the surface, and what do you sort of what comes to mind when I ask you to sort of describe what's happening underneath those 92 acres, the 40 planted and the 52 that aren't?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I always think of like the vineyard as like the tip of the iceberg. These vines, they're beautiful, right? It's amazing, but they are the tip of what's happening. Where grapes are grown is in the soil underneath. Certainly the climate and all of that is very, very important. But what we're seeing is just this tip of all of this life that is underneath the soil, of where so many things are interacting, of which we know precious little. There's very little that we know about what's going on under the soil. One thing I do know is the more that we disrupt, the more that we intervene, the less healthy our place is. So one of the things that we really, really try to do here is we try to look at our place not as an input-driven kind of vineyard, but as this kind of ecosystem, kind of holistically, that, we have to do things to make sure we prevent mildews and things like that. We have to prevent weeds. We have to shoot, train, and all that kind of good stuff. But we always keep in mind that when we do something, it's not in this vacuum. We do an input, and maybe it does powdery mildew, but it also does a whole lot of other stuff. We spray sulfur. Sulfur is a very organic, natural thing to use, very common. But sulfur is not, and it does very well to kill powdery mildew, but it also does very well to kill a lot of other stuff. Sulfur is a very toxic chemical. So we are very minimal. This is that whole idea of using technology, try to minimize. If I can use half as much sulfur and have equal results, boy, that'd be just awesome. So I agree with you. Technology can be sometimes, technology can be a very slippery pathway to the road to hell. We think we can be so clever that using technology that we can control everything is just craziness. And it can be kind of this, seductive, right? Like, oh boy, we can do all this stuff. We're so smart. But the one thing that I have totally learned that through we do all this, like you talked about the imaging and all that the more I learn, the less I know. And, trying to keep that all in mind is very important. So, that tip of the iceberg idea is that, there's this whole soil food web that's going on underneath our soils, underneath our vines, where they are stretching in. And the symbiotic relationships that's happening with the mycorrhiza and all this type of stuff and these fungi that are in the soil is fascinating. Vines cannot uptake things on their own. They cannot, like a lot of micronutrients that are essential to their survival, cannot happen in a sterile environment. It has to have the fungi and the mycorrhiza to help process that through the metabolic pathway so it gets into the plant. So it is super important to have healthy soil. Every time, for instance, tilling is a big issue. So versus irrigation. So this is a super controversial topic, which I'm happy to talk about. So tilling of soils is one of the worst things you can ever do. So when I was a kid in Minnesota growing corn, man, if your field didn't look like it had just been like there was anything but the corn growing on it, it was like you were like embarrassed, right, as a farmer. You go back now today to the middle of the country, nobody tills anymore. They are growing it in untilled soil where they drill the seeds in because they learned all of this cultivating that we're doing and all this chemicals that we were spraying were killing our soils. They're starting to get super unproductive because we're killing all this mycorrhiza, all this other stuff in the soils. So here in Oregon, we get very, very dry summers. And our particular land, we are in the Coast Range. So we're right on the edge of the Coast Range, kind of the westernmost part of the valley. In our sedimentary soils, we have very, very low topsoils, very shallow topsoils, 12 inches of topsoil, very low water holding capacity. Vines do need to struggle. They do need to have, you don't want to have them in these super fertile areas because they just green grow all the time. But you also want to have a healthy vine. In our property, we have to worry about water. Even though, Oregon, everyone thinks of Oregon as this super rainy area. Well, from July to October, it doesn't rain. We get not a drop of water. So the ground becomes very, very dry. And the fact that we only have 12 inches of topsoil that can hold water, we can get into a deficit of water very quickly. Two ways to manage that as a vineyard guy is you can clean cultivate. You can go through your property, get rid of all the grasses that are also using water to leave just that water available to your vine. The trade-off you're making is killing your soil. When you till, like a rototiller, like I see these guys in their gardens rototilling, they're destroying your soil. Don't ever, ever, ever rototill. You are just absolutely killing that environment where all of the stuff lives that your plants need. So that's one way to do it. You till, you clean, your vines can have more water available to them. We don't do that because I believe every time you till your soil, you're killing it. So we irrigate gently, some years, not all years. The reason you'll see drip lines everywhere you go here, one of the reasons we have drip lines is, as I mentioned, we grafted all our own vines originally for this property. When you graft them, when you buy them from a nursery, what they do is the first year they'll put them in a nursery block and water them because they won't live without water. And then you get them, they're hardened off, you can plant them without water. We would take them straight from our greenhouse into the vineyard. So that first year was actually the first year in the vineyard, so they had to have water. So we developed irrigation, and so every block has irrigation because of that, which is a great tool, in my opinion, because we can really monitor our soils and make sure that the vines remain healthy without being overly aggressively watered. So it's a great tool. So we choose not to till, but have irrigation available that if we need it, we use it. The best scenario is never have to use it. And as I always say, as a guy who has irrigation, I can always choose not to turn it on. But in a dry year where, we're getting some, hotter years, right? I'm not going to weigh into all that, but we definitely have had some hot, dry years. And I know for a fact, because I've been able to water at the right times, I've been able to hang my vines for another week and a half to 2 weeks without them dehydrating. because the vines are going to try to stay alive. They're going to try to find water somewhere. If it means they have to take it out of the grape to stay alive, they're going to do that. The grapes get very sugar ripe, and I had this originally 2003, our second vintage. The grapes were getting super ripe, taste like sugar. You measure it to be 25% sugar, 25 bricks, but they were green. You taste them, and they taste unripe and sweet. A weird kind of corollary, but that's because they were trying to stay alive. They were dehydrating. So if I can hold my vines hang time another week and a half and still have not grapes that are super overripe, but that are going to make wines in the 13s alcohol, that's a great thing. That's a great tool to have. This is a very controversial issue because some people are like, again, that thing of never water, never intervene. Yeah. I will tell you, everybody waters their vines. Some comes from the sky, and they get it whenever they get it. Some people have the ability to maybe mitigate some of the issues that come from climate. And I firmly believe that in the future, this is something a lot of people don't like to talk about. In the future, I really believe Oregon will have majority irrigated vines as we go. Yeah. So what's under our place, though, is we've got in the Coast Range. So this part of Oregon, I don't know how much the geology stuff you want to get geeky on, but
we can go there.
Okay.
Yeah, if you've got the data, then
okay.
Let's rock and roll.
So about 50 million years ago, all of this part of Oregon was under the water, under the ocean. So this whole plate that we're on was underwater, under the ocean. The ocean ran basically to where Idaho is now. San Juan de Fuca plate's cruising in, subducting underneath the continental plate, which is the United States, and it pushed up all of this stuff from Oregon. This western Oregon got pushed out of the ocean, so it rose from the ocean. So the vast majority of what this part of Oregon, if you go deep enough, gets to this marine sedimentary soils. But then on top of that, layered in all that pressure created volcanic activity, created the big cascade, the beautiful mountain ranges, and that created a lot of lava flow. What we've got is, as that plate was hitting the geology of here, it was creating undersea volcanic activity before it rose up, and then it pushed that volcanic soils up along with the sedimentary soils. So what we've got here, and the further west you go in Oregon, the more you'll see this kind of combination of volcanic and these very old, sedimentary and these very old volcanic uplifts. Yeah. So what we've got on our property, that's why we've got these blocks that are so different. And this huge variation is we've got these little spots that'll be this chunk of volcanic uplifted soil. Then we'll have the sedimentary soil. And each one of our blocks are very, very different parentage underneath, and it's amazing. You can actually see these are core samples. You can't see them on the radio, but here we've got these core samples that are actually half scale. They represent if you took and dug a hole 4 foot deep, you would see this underneath these 4 blocks. And when you look at it, you can tell they're just different soils. You can see this is the Rennell's block, very clay-based, sedimentary soil, up to like Abby's block with this kind of graveliness to it underneath. Sarah Jane's has this red kind of almost, you see a little bit of volcanic activity along with sedimentary. And it's amazing. And that's why it's how different these wines come, because they come from different places. Even though they're 100 yards apart, I can throw a baseball from one to the other. They're different. It's amazing. And when you get here, actually, when you look from a Google map, sometimes you look at our property and you'll see these, the blocks are weird. Why aren't they square, right? Why don't you just make a square? It'd be a lot easier to farm. And there's these weird shapes. But then when you get here, you'll see why. Because it changes. The soil changes based upon that. And that's how we tried to lay it out, was based upon that, the what's underneath. And, the differences also in the Coast Range, we get a lot of weather because we are coastal. We have that maritime. Has anyone talked to you about the Van Duzer Corridor?
A little bit,
yeah. So Van Duzer Corridor is this thing. So we're right on the foothills of the Coast Range, which separates the Willamette Valley from the ocean. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have the Coast Range, we would be so much colder than we are. So the Coast Range helps to create this valley of kind of a mitigating of temperatures. But what happens is the Van Duzer Corridor, it's about a 4,500-foot coastal mountain. At the Van Duzer Corridor, it literally drops to a V down to about 400 feet. So it's this natural land bridge to the ocean. Mm-hmm. And in the summer, especially, what you'll get these super warm days. And then that warmth creates a heat sink for the ocean to bring in these maritime, these breezes from the ocean at the end of the day. And it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer. You'll have a 95-degree day, and you flip on the air conditioner. And it's not unusual out here to be 95 in the day and 54 degrees at night. So this super huge diurnal swing in temperature, which has a major effect on us. But that's, but it's very different from the top of our property to the bottom. We have 600 feet elevation at the top, 300 at the bottom. We get wind and actual direct effect of Van Duzer up there. Down in the bottom, you'll feel this more kind of cooling flow of air kind of wafting down, not the breeze. So huge differences from a climatology perspective on our property and a geological perspective of our property, which then we try to bring through in the winemaking by being minimalist and letting the wine show through.
Absolutely amazing. Literally everybody I've spoken to has absolutely nailed it.
People love to talk about Oregon.
I've been so impressed.
It's a super exciting place. I mean, it's funny because I think a little bit of that is we've had to talk about our place, right? We've had to educate people why Oregon. I mean, I can tell you 20 years ago when we got here, I was selling my first wine. I remember I'd go to the East Coast and they go Oregon. Remind me where that is again?
Yeah.
Is it somewhere north of California? And now you go somewhere and it's oh, you're from the Willamette Valley.
Yeah.
I want to try your wine. So that 20 years has been amazing from, you're that weird pioneer. And by no means are we the innovators of Oregon. There were people that were the true pioneers that took arrows to their back and they worked and they toiled and left a legacy for us to be able to dovetail on. So I'm not trying to say that anyway we were pioneering or but a small very part of this. But the difference that's happened in 20 years in Oregon has been amazing, and it's really cool.
This is great. You're really, I guess, fleshing out why the people that I've seen and spoken with so far are such great communicators, simply because, I guess you've been doing that kind of hand-to-hand combat for the last 20 years by your own admission. You've been telling people, you've been, needing to, I guess, bring people virtually, give them that virtual tour. And really what I'm asking you and all of the winemakers to do here, you really genuinely all doing so well. And I couldn't figure out why. And I think you've really given me a huge piece of that. It's because you've been doing it consistently and in a way that I think is clear and that people get and is engaging. You've been doing that for a long period of time. So then, when the mic goes in your hand, it's kind of then you're using the muscle that's already ready to tell that story. So again, I just invite you to, now we've got some glasses in front of us. Just I guess continue that story through from yourself, through from your input and the land, through to how does all of that then show up in the glass.
Yeah, so I think as we alluded to, we think that wine is about a time and a place, and our perspective is not to try to, manufacture wine or push a wine to some place that we think it should be. We really try to take our wines and let them show what they're supposed to be. So, winemaking style, the way we do it is we try to grow our grapes in a fashion that will express its place, and so we do that by a little bit of that, that farming of intentionality, and really trying to make these vines be healthy long term. So the initial thing is we have long ago decided that we're going to be doing the selection masal idea of having these multi-clonal plantings in the vineyard and these blocks, so that when you taste our blocks, you're not tasting something to do with clone of a Pinot Noir or some sort of winemaking perspective. We try to be as similar as we can on that. We do individually farm our blocks based on what they need, so we're very hands-on on that. But so the first thing is grow our grapes, grow them organically, be minimally interventional, create good ripe grapes that express the place. In the McMinnville AVA, we tend to wines that are pretty muscular. So because of things, and it's interesting. So when I first got here, I really tried to kind of, why are your wines so, why do they have this structural component? Why are they dark? Why, right? I get that all the time. And at some point, I just decided, what? I'm going to quit trying to figure out why and just go with is. You know, it doesn't matter to me now, like, oh, it's the soil or it's the climate or it's the Van Duzer. Yeah, all of these things play into that notion of that overused word of terroir. But at the end of the day, I don't have to know that because I'm not a research scientist. Mm-hmm. I'm a guy growing grapes, making wine. To me, I've just gotten to this point of it is what it is. So that's what we do. So we try to take these grapes, and from a winemaking perspective, we try to do as little as we possibly can. So what we'll do is we will grow the grapes, we'll bring them in organically. We do very intensive sorting, so we make sure that one thing I believe is what goes into the fermenter, you can never, if you're trying to cover up something that went in that wasn't perfect, you'll never be able to do it, and it'll always show. So Pinot Noir is unforgiving in that way that it will show things that happen negatively very quickly. So sort very intensively. I try to say every cluster gets picked up and gets looked at as it's going down the sorting table before it goes into the fermenter. We sort after the fermenter as well, or through the destemmer, or after the destemmer. So we'll sort pre and post destemmer, so that any jacks or anything like that get pulled out. The little, pieces of stem that get through. We do 100% destem our Pinot Noir, which is another. That's a lot of people will throw in a component of stems. One thing that we have here is in the McMinnville AVA, the small part of the Willamette Valley, we tend to have a lot of structural components. I don't feel, as a winemaker, that we need any more structure to our wines. And in fact, I think it actually starts taking away from it. And my particular perspective is adding stems in from our place. I'm not going to talk about anybody else, but from our place, it tends to mask that particular block, because when I've done it in the past, they start to equilibrate. The wines all start to come together more, like to me, to be similar, versus showing that individual place, and we're all about place. So we destem 100%. We do a bit of a cold soak, because I actually love the extraction that we get from a cold soak. And so we do that in basic cold soak is pre-fermentation, letting it sit on the grape skins without alcohol. You get a more fruity, a little bit more of a high fruit component coming from that. And then we try to start with native ferments. So we definitely will start with native ferments. I will use commercial yeast if I think it needs to be used. So I'm not. One thing I've tried to be less of in my life is having these dogmatic approaches to things of like, here's my line. It's come hell or high water, I'm never going to cross this line because that's what I do. I'm trying to get away from that in general of, look at the situation, try to be, responsive to what's happening. And by setting these kind of artificial parameters, I think it actually limits you as a human being. And so we try not to do that. So, once it goes into fermentation, we tend to try to mitigate the temperatures because, again, we have this robustness to our wines. So we try to keep the temperatures fairly cool. One thing we've got here is we've got temperature control. So the one intervention I will do during fermentation is monitoring so we don't get too high spikes of temperature, which I think tend to bring out a rustiness that I'm not looking for. When it's done, we free run out of barrel or free run from the fermenter into barrel, heavy lees, so we don't settle it, because I actually think the lees bring that sense of place from the property into the wine. Heavy lees, and then it goes into barrel, and that's it. We top it, we keep an eye on it, we let it go through ML, but once it goes into barrel, we try to never touch it until bottling, unless it needs it. Unless it just tells me, like some barrels will just say, like, yeah, I need some air, I need to be racked. But by general, we follow a very kind of reductive winemaking style, not meaning reduction, but reductive, meaning we don't rack it, we don't add a lot of air. My opinion is, once those grapes have turned into wine, every time I touch it, I'm putting my thumbprint on it every time I do that, and I'm also extracting a little bit of its soul, a little bit of its personality from it. So we try not to touch it until we do the final blends.
Cool. Okay.
So what this is, the first wine that we're tasting is called our Heritage Estate. And where this came from was all of our blocks are named after a matriarch of our family. So the original Ronell's block is named after my mom because she put this silly notion in my head that I could do whatever I wanted, and as long as you work hard at it. So that was dedicated to my mom, and that's been the block that we've taken as cuttings for the rest of our block. We've developed our vineyard. It's the mother block of our vineyard because everything else has come from that. And so the heritage is our heritage. It's our heritage of our place. It's the names of my wife's great grandmother, Sarah Jane, our 2 daughters, Abby and Tallulah's. So this is a blend of our 4 heritage blocks, our oldest blocks, planted between 1999 and 2003. So they are coming from the older blocks, the older vines, these very, very different soil types that come through. And the whole idea of this wine is to try to capture what I thought the vintage was at Coeur De Terre in a microcosm. So take our 4 older blocks, taste the barrels. The barrels tell you what they're supposed to be if you listen. So I taste through them. Some say they should be in our heritage. Some say they taste like that block more. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, we do these all blind, and we do blends, and we machinate on these blends, and we do them 100 times, and finally they come to a place and they just they just seem right. So that's what this is. This is a blend of our 4 older blocks with the idea of capturing our place that year in a macrocosm maybe. I think this is representative of us. One thing I like about it, it's got that depth, that structural component to it, which I think is McMinnville, is Coeur De Terre. And 15 was a very warm, ripe year, but it still maintains a nice acid backbone to me, which is so important with Pinot Noir. And that's a matter of being able to pick it at the right time. That's not by adding anything. And then it's still has that sense of place, that dark, deep, structural black fruit, but brightness along with it.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the strength really of kind of responding in the moment and really just trying to draw some lines as I go through is that something came up yesterday, which was was with Claire, a big table, and we were talking about the difference between, I guess, the blends versus the single vineyard plots and the single block sites, and something that I said that I think she responded well to was that it's almost like having a drone up in the air, and with the sort of the blend, you do get to see everything, but maybe you miss some of the edges, and you get a much broader sense. But then when you come down, you're seeing a lot more detail. And I've just got to say, this is a really interesting blend for me, because there is still that kind of sense and what you're saying of that kind of, this is showing the property, and this is showing who we are and what happened in that year. But there's for me there's a surprising amount of detail here as well. It's almost like you've used that technology maybe, and you've sharpened up that camera, and it's lovely. It really is a gorgeous wine, and really like all of the wines that I've had, even. It's quite subtle. As I say, there's a lot of detail there. I find it a really elegant expression of Pinot, and I think it makes me excited then to see what other detail is picked out by those other single block wines.
So I love the elegant comment. So one of the things on McMinnville AVA, we can be super big wines. Yeah. So it's interesting as I become more experienced, the more vintages I do, I feel like I can maybe do less, right? And I think it's a little bit of the vines maturing, getting older, and me maturing and getting older, and that we've figured each other out a little bit. And the fact that I used to think like, oh, we need to extract, or we need to do this, or maybe be a little more heavy-handed, and it's great to be able to get to this point of just kind of like, let's just let them be. Let's just kind of take it off and just, my job is like, I think, kind of like, I don't know, maybe the conductor of a symphony versus, the guy, having to be perfect on that one little flute or whatever it is. So it's been more, it's been very interesting to see that I don't know, maybe that as I think you do more and you understand that you know less, but then you can also feel like you can be, trusting more of what it does. So now what we're doing is we've had the first one was a blend of the 4 blocks, and now we're kind of deconstructing, I guess. We're going down into components, 2 of the components that go into this. I think what you'll see is you'll be able to pull out a little bit of what that component is in that heritage blend where it comes from Abbeys and Tallulahs. But essentially what this does is these are 2 of our 4 block designates. These 2 blocks are I like to juxtapose these 2 because they're at the same elevation, basically, in the same elevation. So these both run from about 400-foot elevation on the base to about 450. Tallulah's goes up to about 472, something like that, elevation-wise. Abbeys block is mostly southeast facing. This weird sedimentary soil that has, it's kind of yellowy, very unique. I've never seen it anywhere else. And it's very unique soil. We actually had a geologist say he had never seen it before. So more southeast facing, our last block that always gets picked because it's the coolest. It doesn't get that hot westerly sun in the afternoon. To Tallulah's block, which is south to southwest facing. And it's actually a metamorphic soil where it starts having a blend of the volcanics coming in along with sedimentary. So even though they're on different sides of this little bowl, if you look here when you're looking at the property, it's this little bowl that's kind of created with Tallulahs and Abbeys, and they reflect on each other. They look at each other. They are named after my 2 daughters, Abby and Tallulah, who have so many similarities and so many differences. And that reflection of the 2 together always just kind of I don't know. It intrigues me how similarity, like that same thing with the kids being similar and different, having, generally the same makeup, but being so different. The same thing with these wines. The other thing that fascinates me about these wines are, I don't know how it happened or when it happened, but the blocks' personalities of their wines are very similar to the personalities of my daughters. And it's weird. So Tallulah's is the wine that has our most kind of, I'd say, of the 4 blocks, it's always the one that has the brightest kind of fruit, happy. It's this wine that comes out and it walks into a room and it's in your face. And that's the way my daughter Tallulah is. She'll walk into a room. She's our little politician, hugging people and shaking hands and kissing babies, the whole bit. She just she loves that. She loves that being, expressive. And she'll dance into a room singing. And to me, that's what Tallulah's does to me. Tallulah's is always the wine that is the first of our blocks to show itself. It's the one that's open, it's bright, it's happy, it's red, it's light, airy. So that's what I think of Tallulah's run. And Tallulah's has got this life vibrancy to it. And then Abbeys, on the other hand, to me, is the wine that always takes the longest to reveal itself. It's the wine that always, when you first open it, we do our first releases, it's always the one that's a little tighter, a little closed, a little one that you have to kind of get to know a little bit. But then over time, as you get to know it, it always develops this intensity and this kind of layers. It's like the more you get to know Abby's block, you're like, wow, I didn't remember that last time. And then you get another aspect like, wow, that's interesting. My daughter Abby, same thing. She's very quiet. She'll walk in a room super quiet, but then you talk to her and she can go very, very smart girl. She'll go from talking about, she'll tell you about all the early Beatles songs to she can talk about quantum mechanics. It's just like this crazy layers and depth, or about neoclassical art. I'm like, and so, but she doesn't get in your face about it. She'll as you talk to her, she'll have this stuff. It's revealing. And that's what I think about Abby's block, is that wine that's not always there in your face, but as you get to know it, as it ages, as it develops, it shows that robustness and that kind of layered in detail. So Abby's is always the one we pick. It's probably about, depending on the year, up to 2 weeks later than Tallulah's we'll pick it. And it usually is a little bit more ethereal, I would say. And it takes that time, again, to develop. So we actually do a wine auction. I'm part of Willamette Valley Wineries Association, which is a really great organization that Emily's helped out, I think, on this. And the first auction blend I did was these 2 together, these 2 blocks, because I thought it was super interesting, that kind of dichotomy, that reflection of the 2. So that's we called it our reflection block originally. This year I'm calling it our Fleur de la Cour, because it's my girls. They love Harry Potter, and that's one of the characters of Harry Potter. And I also thought the flower of the heart, right? Even though we've changed it, because I don't think it was that in the book, but the flower of the heart, which is my daughters. So I think that was very representative of that too. So
they'll be happy to hear that when they listen back.
Yeah. So same vintage, same winemaking, and then that sense of place coming through on the Pinots. So again, I get definitely that bright fruit on Tallulah's right away, that cherry, that more bright lift that's there. And then Abbey's to me has got a little bit more of these kind of almost spice characteristics, these kind of exotic spice characteristics that I see coming through on the Abbeys, which is very interesting right now. That's what hit me right away on it.
I genuinely don't have masses to add there. I think I'm sure your daughters are going to be very happy to hear this back and hear you making the connection between them and these blocks. And again, I'm just taken again back to that idea of we're sort of really zooming in now on the blocks, and for these two wines to be so different and from the same hillside, it's just, I think it's that thing that again you just do need to keep saying out there, that it is totally possible for the same property and vineyards that are, as you say, a stone's throw or a baseball's throw away from each other to be so different. And I'm getting that same sort of response, I would say, to the wines. One is, I would say, certainly the Tallulah is more fruit forward, and as you say, that kind of spice, that kind of almost herbaceousness coming from the Abbey's block, and that's, I think, the beauty of what I'm finding here with a lot of the single vineyards is that these wines are potentially very complementary, and I'm sure around this table that we're sitting at, they've inspired debate, and maybe the odd argument about which one are we going to get, and which one's your favorite, and what food would this go with, and I think to me it's really wines like these that they do both grab your attention in different ways, but they then sort of go beyond it, and it's I think switches the focus more to how you're going to enjoy these wines there, and I just think it's great to have been able to share everything that's gone into making these wines. Whereas when I guess people get these in the glass, they're then in a different phase, and I say looking forward and just enjoying them, because at the end of the day they're just really enjoyable wines to have.
So there's a couple points there that I thought you made that I thought were very interesting. Is one of the things and I didn't mention this about McMinnville, is I think the savory characteristic is one of the parts that's unique about our area. We tend to get a lot of savory tones, this kind of sauvage kind of idea, and that's very, I think, emblematic of McMinnville AVA. So I totally get that. The other piece is folks that have been part of the winery for a long time, buying our wines, they truly do. And actually every Earth Day we do was when we release these blocks, and we do some sort of thing. You'll see, there's the guy who's he's always the Tallulah guy, right? And he'll argue about it. He'll be like, no, Tallulah's better. And then someone's like, no, Rennell's. I love Rennell's block. And it's like, God, it's so funny, right? How they have their camps that they're in. So I then when you mentioned that, I'm like, it's totally done that, and it cracks me up. So I actually get a lot of times people ask me what's your favorite? And that's a tough one.
That's literally. What's
right.
your favorite child?
Yeah, it is. It's actually easier to say who my favorite child is, but I won't mention that. So it is interesting, and I actually like that. To me, that I like when wines have a debate. I've often said that the worst thing that somebody can say to me about my wines is oh yeah, that's fine, it's okay. It's I'd rather have you say you don't like it, and at least I got a response. I want wines to have some sort of response. And to me, that's what it's about, is that, and maybe I'm so connected to this place that it's like it just responds to me that way. But we tend to see that, and I really am happy when that happens.
So really, yeah, in closing, I just want to say again, another huge thank you again, as well as the eloquence, I guess, and the storytelling that I'm coming across here in the Willamette Valley has just been the, incredible hospitality and, the real personal touch, and just everybody really being so engaged in the what I'm doing in the interviews, and I genuinely feel that will sort of pay you back in a sense, because it will mean that a strong connection is made with the listener, kind of no matter where they happen to be around the world. And I think that's a nice link through to just sort of, just really throwing open the door for you to say something about, where are these wines, where do you hope that they're going to be enjoyed in the future? Where are they currently being enjoyed, away from this table, I guess, and in people's homes, potentially in other parts of the world? Yeah, that just sort of, in your own words, just sort of, fill in that sort of blank for me and for the listener.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thanks for making this trip all the way here. We really appreciate it. Oregon is an amazing place, and to truly experience it, you can get a little bit of that through the wine, through the glass. But I encourage everyone to come here. It truly is. I've been to a number of places, certainly in the country and around the world. It's just a very, very special place to be. So we appreciate you taking the time to come all the way. So that first thing is, get on that plane, make your way over here, because it's really, truly cool, and it's an amazing place. I think you're going to find that the food, the wine, the people, there's not a whole lot of places like this in the world. So we'd love that. So where I envision our wines ultimately going is, I would love to see certain markets. I think the UK, London is such an amazing wine market, and the knowledge that people have of wine, is well documented. And I would love to see our wines make our way across the pond and have a home, and see some people who are into these kind of New World Pinot Noirs. Not that I think I don't view myself as this New World guy, but we are from the New World. And wines of hopefully that show an interest of place. I'd love to see, we currently sell most of our wines domestically, almost 100%. And a lot of that is very local to us from here. But I view it as important that as we are going to grow and as this, we're going to still, I want to make all the wines, so we're only going to grow so much. I always say I'm a very limiting factor because I want to touch all these wines. But I think it's important that as Oregon, that we look at export markets and we look at places that we can have this, and certainly the UK would be, I don't know, there's just such a great relationship, I think, the UK and the United States, and I think that there's, it's a place that, I like to sell our wines where I like to go, and I'd like to go there more often. So yeah, we'd love to see that happen, and we'd love to see that folks come out here.
Another huge thank you to you, Scott, for sharing everything you did in this episode. Once again, putting those storytelling muscles to good use. Do, of course, see below for the Coeur De Terre Vineyard website, where you can find details of how to buy the wines, and details of their location if you ever happen to be in the area and would like to visit, which I can highly recommend. As Scott pointed out in his interview, these wines are not currently represented in the UK, and he is actively seeking representation over this side of the pond. On that third full day in the Willamette Valley, Scott passed the storytelling baton over to Maggie Harrison, winemaker at Antica Terra, who will feature in the next episode, 388. Do please keep all of your feedback coming on this series. If you've been following me for any time, you'll know that these are super in-depth episodes that I'm sharing, and I'd love to hear all about your learnings from these wonderful storytellers. You can find me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.